My name is Amy Wiltsey. I'm the Finance Committee Chair, and I will call to order this evening's budget workshop on February 22nd, 2022. I'd like to start our meeting first by just reminding everyone that we are still required to wear masks indoors, so please keep them on during the meeting. We also have a flip-flop here of our agenda, so we will begin with Mrs. Mangini in the review of educational supplies, equipment, dues, and fees budget.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for indulging us, Ms. Wiltsey, because I did, in fact, write everything with technology first, but put together the presentation with my own section first, so thank you. This evening, as we do address these areas, you will find that there's a lot of overlap at this point. This is the end of our review, so we will have covered every section of the book and all the various accounts. So I will walk you through. Just a couple of things. I wanted to remind you that some of the information that was requested from board members was provided to you this evening with hard copies at your desk. And also, once again, as we work through our presentations, if you could just hold your questions to the end of each of our sections. I'll pause before I turn it over to Ed. So I highlighted those accounts that we're going to be addressing, and they are located in the 600 tab in your budget book, and of course those are the accounts 611 through 690. Tab 700 holds the reports for equipment, and that's object code 730 and 739, and then dues and fees and other we will talk about under tab 800. And just as an overview and kind of a reminder of instructional supplies and your supplies, which falls under these categories, this is from your books. Obviously, there is a summary at the beginning of each section, but instructional supplies are items directly used in the classroom, and there are some examples here. And then we have nurse supplies that are consumables that are provided in the health offices at each school. As we start to look at the 611, the instructional supplies, you will see that there is an increase that equates to about 18.5%. There's a number of reasons for the increase. And first, we need to look back at fiscal year 19. I arrived in June of 2020, the end of June, and obviously that was a year affected by the pandemic. The subsequent year, of fiscal year 21, was the same. So as we look back, and I've mentioned this before, for historical data and how best to fund each line item in our budget, we really have to go back a few years to get a better position for each of the accounts. Fiscal year 19, for example, was over $930,000 for supplies. So as you can see, it's gone down significantly. Now those first two are actuals. In fiscal year 20, we were closed from March on, so obviously there was some savings there. And it was a similar situation last year when we were in school through the hybrid schedule. So in our discussions, Dr. Sunden and I, as you know, met with every single principal and department head. What we heard repeatedly was that the schools are kind of struggling for the needs, classroom resources and the needs in the classrooms as far as supplies. They are trying to get back to pre-pandemic days, and they have had spending freezes for the last couple of years, which have also been a challenge. So we really are trying to support them with this budget. And as you can see, the nurse supplies are level funded. The actuals for last year, those board members that were with us last year may recall that you did approve a transfer into the nurse supply account for some of those items like thermometers and some of the other health equipment that the nurses were asking for. Since we did have some available funds at the end of last year, we thought it was worthwhile, and that certainly helped them, but they feel they can have a level funded budget and be okay for fiscal year 23. Workbooks, I just wanted to talk for a moment about workbooks, textbooks, and supplies. And I wanted to remind the board that last year we didn't have accounts set up specifically for workbooks, so we did begin a new account, and that is the reason why there is no actual expenditures for fiscal year 20. We really worked hard to make certain that we were actually appropriating costs in the right accounts. So you will be able to compare fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23, knowing that it is just workbooks. So for this year, for next year rather, fiscal year 23, there is a slight reduction, and it's just really a matter of the way pricing has come in, the adjustments for each school and their needs. You may see as a result workbooks going down, maybe instructional supplies for that school went up because they're just trying to utilize their money a little differently once they realize that they ordered or put into the proper number of workbooks. I did leave myself notes here, so I want to make sure I didn't miss telling you anything there. Same situation with textbooks. The account includes classroom library books, social study units, and the Bridges Math program materials. Again, a slight reduction, really just based on need and requests. $642, library books, the same, a slight increase here, and primarily based on what the schools felt they needed for next year. $690 is supplies and materials. And as you can see, some of the accounts include computer supplies, which Ed will discuss shortly with you, and custodial supplies, which Rich actually discussed with you last week. So I will address the remaining areas here. There is an increase in office supplies, and office supplies includes copy paper. While we do purchase through the state bid, there has been a struggle in getting copy paper. Like many commodities, there was a shortage right before the holidays, so we did try to get as many of our orders filled as possible, but as a result, the price is increasing, and we're being told that to expect an increase not only in copy paper, but just various other office supplies, which quite honestly, I think we do a really good job in this district of being very careful. Sometimes I have to beg for Post-it notes or whatever else we need. Again, I think our main focus for all of us is money in the classrooms. But unfortunately, copy paper is primarily the issue there. Transportation supplies is actually fuel for our buses. And we level funded it. It might be a risk. I did speak to the town. And last year we did participate in a joint collaboration of a bid process, and by combining the fuel that we went out to bid for, obviously we were able to both the town and the board get a better price. I did speak with Phil Ryan, and we both agreed this was not the time to go out to bid, so we are hoping for late spring. So we will keep a close watch on the market to see when we think we should take that jump. And athletic supplies are actually the request from the schools. And they did increase minimally. Again, same rationale as all the other supply accounts, really just trying to catch up with the past couple of years between spending freezes and just limited amount of purchasing. So that leaves us with the equipment accounts. And Heather did discuss the pupil service accounts last week, and Ed will address the computer equipment accounts next. The instructional equipment accounts include equipment requests for areas such as music, art, PE, as well as equipment for the pre-nursing program. And that is really the primary increase there. Other equipment includes custodial equipment, which Rich did discuss, and the furniture equipment with accounts, which are rather minimal in that we only use those accounts for replacement of something, a desk or two that might break through the year. We've had cafeteria tables that we've had to replace rather unexpectedly. Any of the large purchases for furniture obviously come through the capital budget, and the capital budget will be presented to you either at one of the meetings later this week or next week. I shared this overview for a reason. Our dues and fees, which is reflected at the bottom, is really for the cost of membership to professional associations and organizations district-wide. The increase there is primarily a result of two things. One is some memberships did increase, though minimally. The other is that we did have a number of dues and fees in other areas of the budget that we felt needed to all be under this 800 account. In addition, for the first time this year, we set up separate accounts for both Grinnell and Stratford High School for dues and fees. It's very important when we report to the state that we are capturing the true costs of each school, as that's how we have to report it. So each year, we've gotten a little tighter. I think overall, we were in good shape. There's just a couple of accounts that we've come across that we really needed to separate, and this was one of them. In addition, every year we have our portion after the state monies that come into us for continuing ed. This year, you will see, and I'll move over to the next slide, a $95,000 increase. And that is as a result of the matching contribution that the district has to make for the 21st Century Grant. It's a 5-year grant, and the agreement was in year 4, we had to pay 25% of the cost, and that actually doubles next year where we have to pay 50% of the cost. So for now, we put it into this area as an other, and then as we determine what costs are truly going to be paid out of general operating versus the grant, we'll come to the board to transfer those funds, whether it be to salaries, supplies, or PD. At this point, we just thought it was there as a placeholder since we knew we needed to make certain that those funds were available. And I believe that is it for me. And before I turn it over to technology, I'm happy to address any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mrs. Mangini. If I might, I just wanted to start with a clarification question. When we're talking about textbooks, so we are at system account number 0028, which shows a difference, 59% difference.
Go back.
Yes, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Page 98.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I just want to follow what we did with the accounts because I do see 0163, 0302 completely eliminated. But I see each elementary school listed. So do we need an account for all elementary textbooks? As well as an account for every elementary school's textbook line items?
I don't see any eliminated.
Oh, I'm sorry, 0163, there's no proposed budget, so it was zeroed out, right?
Okay,
And
correct.
0302, those are the two.
And 0163 on the top of page 99 actually had no budget for this year either.
Right.
So they were elementary English textbooks, and it never really had anything in fiscal year 20, so I'm thinking that perhaps it's just something that we haven't used on a regular basis, which I wouldn't think so. I think English textbooks is really a high school account. So I would imagine that textbooks in general are just all falling under the elementary school.
Right, so then that just brings me to my question about 0028 and how it differs from the elementary schools listed below them.
That's the elementary account for the district, and actually it's Linda's account. And I don't know if you can fill in exactly what that was for. I can find it, but.
Sure. I have here the Number Corners booklet
They're books for grade 1, math books. We started number corners in the kindergarten grade level, and are moving into grade 1. And usually, when a new grade level is added, the district will put it into, we put it in the district budget, and then moving forward, the buildings then place their own orders because they know the numbers and the information that they're going to need. So this is the first time it's in my budget. It won't be in my budget after this.
Thank you. That clarifies why there are multiple budgets for elementary textbooks. Thank you.
Okay.
Mrs. Lance?
Thank you. 2 questions. First one, kindergarten supplies. Is that based on the number of kindergartners in the school, or how do they come up with their numbers?
It's based on the need of the school. They look at their inventory, what they feel they need, and yes, it is. Last year we did a per pupil expenditure to try to equalize across the board. It was a little bit more challenging this year because, as I explained, some of the schools really had not had the opportunity to purchase, whereas others might have been a little bit more aggressive in what they need, but I do feel overall it's very equal.
Okay. And my other question is, talk to me about continuing ed. Does Trumbull still come to Stratford for continuing ed?
They're thinking about it. We actually sent them a proposal this year for next year. So we are negotiating because we felt that we needed to increase the cost. And we did send that out about a month ago. So they are.
So are they here right now? Too?
Yes, they are here now.
Okay, so they obviously, do they pay to come here?
They do.
And where does that money go? Does that go to the town or does that come to the board?
It actually offsets the cost to the board.
Okay, so that could cover salaries and things like that for night school.
It does.
Okay, thank you. Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions for Mrs. Mangini? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Malloy?
Good evening. Oops. There we go. I'm going to start my presentation by identifying 2 focus areas. I'd first like to start with the past, take a walk down memory lane all of a year ago, and then get into the budget overview. So a year ago, it was actually February 18th, I talked about some challenges we were having, and I was actually kind of panicked. I was worried about a few areas, and these are the areas that I identified. Staff and salaries, our hardware refresh cycle, which was slowing down, and also limited instructional technology support. We realized too, this was coming out of the pandemic where technology was so important that some of these areas were even more intensified. So let's look at staffing challenges last year. We had, as I said, 3.5 FTE, so 3.5 building techs to cover 15 buildings. So if you do the division there, that wasn't looking so good to be able to do that coverage. We're also outsourcing technicians to be able to keep our Chromebook fleet up and running. Again, that fleet was aging, so it was very important to have these repair techs. And also demand at the high school was increasing. We just had the new Stratford High School. A lot of technology was added there. But the good news, a year later, we added a 1.0 Chromebook repair tech, but it's from ESSER funding, so not our budget, from ESSER. And we also, based on a variety of opportunities, we were able to add, or actually replace devices, which then decreased support to some extent. Let's look at the hardware refresh slowdown I talked about last year. If you look on the right side, those are the priority areas. You might remember, but smart boards are a real problem. We had about 200 that were over 10 years old. There were many Chromebooks that needed to be refreshed. Again, through the pandemic, we were scrambling. We were finding anything that was available, and many were very old. And then we also learned that we had staff who really, we weren't focusing on staff and getting them new devices. So the good news there, kind of a complete turnaround, that we have 150 new smart boards going in right now, by the way. We're 70% done with that project. 4,000 new Chromebooks, many staff devices were replaced. And one thing I realized after I created this slide is we received a laptop for every high school teacher. So aside from the funding sources I'm identifying at the bottom, the money came in from a variety of places. But I guess the point I'm making is not from the general fund. And what I'm concerned about is the future. Also last year, I talked about instructional technology support. You hear me talk about this a lot, and I'm not going to spend too much time here because I know it's not really financially feasible right now, but we do still have this need, a need for consistency. We did have a teacher in 2016. In fact, in 2006, when I arrived, we had 2 instructional technology teachers. We also had an elimination at the middle school level of library media specialists. So I guess what I was expressing last year is we're definitely struggling for that consistency and the ability to help teachers. But maybe next year we'll focus more in that area. We'll see. Getting into the budget. On page 138 in your book, you'll see the chart of the technology accounts. That was the chart that was on the screen right when we started. And overall, you're going to see that there is a 7.58 increase. 3 of the accounts that are causing the majority of the increases are right here. 652 instructional software, up $62,000. Parts, up $20,000. Operational software, up $63,000. I'll go over each of those. After this slide, you could feel free to ask me questions, and I'm going to go account by account. We did have some decreases because we were trying everything possible to offset some of these costs. In 690 are maintenance contracts, down $17,000, and also outsourced assistance, we cut that by $15,000. Again, I'll be going over all of these starting now. 652. So this account has the most dollars associated with it. And I'm going to break it down into 3 areas, as you'll see on the next slides. But up 23% overall, but mostly based on transfers. So items that were, say, once in the reading budget that has now been brought into technology because the software is reading based. Also, a lot of the items historically in this account were mostly tools. I'll show you that in a minute. So again, this account 652, let me break it down into 3 areas. The first area or category is the curriculum department. So as you can see here, high dollar amount items because they're based on instructional programs. And in my notes column, you can see the ones that are brought in from other accounts. So again, although this account went up $62,000, it's really mostly because items were brought in. Some of the items are items that you talked about in previous budget presentations, specifically the reading programs. I'm going to move on. Elementary library has a chunk of applications. Collectively, that's about $22,000. These titles have been with the elementary library program for about 10 years. I went to the lead elementary specialist. They say these are still relevant. They have them written into their curriculum, so we didn't touch them. In the last category, district technology, these are kind of the traditional applications. This is what the account was basically for the past years. Screencastify is actually a newer program that teachers use to record demonstrations on their computers. Valid Destiny is a library automation program for when kids are taking out library books. Adobe subscriptions are mostly used at the high school level. And then we have 2 lines that help us advance our software and also buy small bits of software for various needs. So a lot of software there in instructional technology, account 0652. Okay. Moving on, this is an account that went down a little bit. 690 maintenance contracts, overall down 12%. The types of applications here are virus protection, backup software, and Wi-Fi tools. This is also where you're going to find Securely, which is our web filtering product in student alerts. We eliminated a product called GoGuardian Teacher. So this is used for teachers to monitor students' Chromebooks. So if you're a teacher, you can push content to your Chromebooks But we found that only 25% of teachers were using it, and unfortunately, it went up 300%. So we made a tough call from going from 7,500 to 30,000, and we decided we're not going to include that one. And we also chose a different solution for server backup, so that reduced the cost here. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of what you would think technology is, our hardware. I've already kind of covered this, but these three accounts represent hardware at the elementary, middle, and high school level. As you can see in the chart, you can see what was budgeted the last 6 years and then what we actually spent. So part of the picture I'm trying to paint here is that we're not really relying on our general fund. We're hoping there's going to be other sources down the road. We have been successful. We've been able to stay current. Last year we were teetering. I was getting nervous, but we have been able to eventually attain the funding. Okay. Here are the rest of the accounts. Parts have gone up by $20,000. We have more Chromebooks in kids' hands and staff hands, and we also have the middle school one-to-one program. The next account, network repair, has stayed the same. 859 is tech infrastructure. That's where we decreased the amount of money budgeted for outsourced support because we added a Chromebook tech. 1019 is our communications account. That's a pretty big account. You have your internet, you have your fiber connections between buildings, you have the cost of the phone system, voice over IP system. So that's a pretty big line item. 858 says computer services. That's a historical label, but it's really our high-end database. It's our Power School for Student database and Alio for human resources and finance. Then you get to 860, operational software. That went up significantly for two reasons. One is the EdReflect program. That is a program that curriculum uses for teacher evaluation. That, unfortunately, went from $15,000 to $45,000. So it's something that's being considered inside for other alternatives, but as of this moment, that's what we have in the budget. Also, Google Education Plus, that could also be /Zoom. So we basically had that in ESSER last year. We moved it into the general fund. It's used for advanced Google tools, but also a lot of system administration and security tools. So that is a general overview. There's a lot of technology, but those are the key areas, the key increases. Again, this is page 138 in your book. And at this point, I'll take any questions.
Mr. David?
Yes. Okay. Regarding the laptops, we'll call it Chromebooks,
yeah.
Thank you. What's our replacement plan going forward to making sure we're never we have to replace half again? Is that built into this budget or your capital budget, or?
It's a very unique year because we've received so many Chromebooks. We've replaced half of our fleet. So in essence, we're kind of taking advantage of a year that we don't really need to refresh as we typically would. But that time's going to come soon, 2 to 3 years out, where we're going to have, let's say, a 5-year refresh cycle and basically refresh about 20% each year. Pam and I have talked about leasing options. That might be a good option in the future to have a solid budget item every year. But to answer the question directly, it doesn't really impact next year because the majority of our Chromebooks, probably 80%, are within 1 to 2 years old.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bedell, you mentioned your hand?
I was just wondering if you would be able to share a copy of this with us once you're done?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Malloy, Mr. Henry?
It might be a silly question, I'm not a computer guy, but our Chromebooks are at the end of a student's cycle to graduate. Are we taking those Chromebooks back and recycling them, or are we sending them off with the kids?
So far, we've been taking them back and filtering them down, but this will be the first year where the graduating seniors will have Chromebooks that are, I think, about 4 years old, and it's a discussion we should have. A few years ago, we thought about possibly offering it to them for, say, $50. So that's one way of doing it. But it's tricky because as they age, they do still have some use in a variety of ways. Not always necessarily in our network, but say for a home user or a kid going to college, that might be worth it. So it really depends on the age of the device.
And is there a value to rebuilding them, or is it once they get to a certain age, it's just?
Yeah, once they get to a certain age, that's it. It's like a lot of technology today, like Apple iPads, that unfortunately they manufacture them for 5 years and they don't give you software updates after a certain period of time. So the good old days, you'd have a device and it could last forever. Now, unfortunately, these companies build in their model that they're obsolete after 5 to 6 years.
Thank you.
Mrs. Cupie?
So, Mr. Malloy, you mentioned the Go Guardian application.
Go Guardian Teacher.
Go Guardian Teacher.
Yes.
Okay. Was that elementary, did you say?
It's K-12, and we surveyed staff to see is it used predominantly, say, at the high school level, and it is across the board from K-12 special ed equally. But the problem was too, or not the problem, but out of all the teachers, only 1 out of 4 actually used it
And,
or reported that they use it.
okay, well, so first, thank you for sharing the stats, right? Like, we've, assessed this, and it's a small percentage of staff that's using it. How did we determine to roll this out? And is the licensing for it a one-time across the board, or is it at different levels?
Well, every year it renews. And at the beginning of the pandemic, so if you're teaching remotely in your home, well, now you can push content out to your students who are at home. So it was a very valuable tool. I'm not going to say that the company did this intentionally, but it seemed like a little bit of a bait and switch, that it came in at $5,000 and now all of a sudden 2 years later they're charging us $30,000. They say it was just a mistake. Maybe it was, but it then becomes a significant increase. So even though it's a great tool, with the relatively small usage and that massive increase, we decided to eliminate it.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. I mean, at 5,000, that's reasonable to apply it across the board.
Right.
But with such an increase, it does lead me to my other question of just how we determine when to roll a product out across the board, or do we go through a trial process? Do we pilot things before we spread it across, and then we hear, well, it's not being used, or whatever the case might be?
I'd say the tools that typically relate directly to technology, we always start with a trial.
Okay.
Even with hardware, I often use a Lord chip, a smaller school, so that you spend the least amount, but you get a good sampling. So yeah, typically we pilot and then we roll out. We work with the curriculum department to make sure that they feel it's sound and we'll meet certain goals there. So we do go through a process.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Mr. Malloy, if I might just add, Mrs. Cupie touched on exactly what I was going to say, but I just wanted to thank you, one, for always presenting a budget where you prove that historically you do more with less, and by using data to show savings is remarkable and something that I really want to see everywhere. If we've got a program that's not being used, we should continually pay for it. So thank you. I'm sorry that it's a loss within your department, but also very happy that we're not wasting $30,000. So thank you. Were there other questions? Mr. Mueller? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes our presentations for this evening. I do have one thing that I would like to just say to Dr. Sunden, and thank you all of the administrators for your presentations leading up to the conclusion of these workshops. A few weeks ago, when I asked the crazy question at the end of presentations with our administration, what your one wish would be for your department, I'd love to all of the answers, but I was negligent in not asking Dr. Sunden what your one wish for our district might be in this budget season. So if you would entertain.
Well, if I appreciate that, I really do. I have a lot of wishes. I really do. I think we are on the precipice of some opportunities to really create a very coherent and very collaborative educational system here in Stratford. And really, as I say that, my needs will be instruments that allow us to create systems, right? And systems that allow us to move the needle towards our end game, which is realizing that all 6,800 students achieve those competencies that we've identified through the Portrait of a Graduate, which we're rolling out beginning, I believe, tomorrow, correct? So we're going full steam ahead with that work. At the very outset of this question, I think a lot of our resources needs to be directed at constructing a very coherent and intentional strategic operating plan. That has to be the forefront of what we do, because that SOP will be the guide map that we use to put everything in play, that we use to justify how we allocate the financial resources, i.e. the budget, over the next fiscal year and the years to come. So while I have big dreams, and at the same time still looking to be mindful about making sure we utilize taxpayer funds in a responsible way, I would say my initial priority right now is having the resources to construct a viable and strong, collaborative, strategic operating plan.
Great, thank you. Before we adjourn for this evening, are there any other questions for either Dr. Sunden, Mrs. Mangini, or Mr. Malloy?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Henry?
Yeah, so going back to Aspire, I know you guys had put some information. Do we, I was under the impression I could have, do we have 14 or 24 students there?
We have 16 there this year. On your sheet, you can see this year we're up to 16 now.
Okay.
And then we have spots for 24.
We have what?
Spots for 24.
Okay. So in the math, just so I understand it, the regular tuition is $114,500. And the reduced rate, so we're paying $55,000 times 24?
No, times 16.
Okay. Okay.
We have a total lump sum that we pay. And what I did was take that lump sum and divide it by the number of students that are currently attending.
Okay.
So if I had 24 there, it still would have been dividing in the same lump sum.
So we're not, we have, what is that lump sum then?
It's $890,000.
Thank you, Pam. So obviously, we would have even more savings if I had 24 students there, because 890 divided by 24 would be less than 55,000.
And is the number less because we've moved some kids out of that program?
Yeah, I mean, all programs fit a profile of student that has exceptionalities that meet that program's needs.
Mm-hmm.
Our current students, we have, anyone that would meet that needs is there. We don't have 24 students that would meet the needs of that
Do you
program.
anticipate that number going up or down?
That's hard to predict, because again, you'd have to meet the profile of the needs of that student. What I've seen is it seems to be decreasing, not increasing. As you can see on that sheet, the number of students each year has gone down a little bit.
Right. And then on the second page, the state students, can you explain that sheet to me? The CES, DDPs, and special needs.
Okay, yeah, so that was a request that Sean had. He wanted to know how the impact has been since the state changed the age out limit. So that went from, we used to educate our students till they were 21, and now we educate them until they're 22. So that's the impact that has had on our budget last year and this year. So those are students that would have aged out before the law changed.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Davis?
Yes, through the chair, if I could ask anyone, I'll go through Dr. Sunden first, and he can direct it where. The 16 students that at Aspire was not there. How much would it probably estimated cost to send them out of district per student? Because my guess would be with transportation about $150,000.
So it would depend on where the students were placed outside of district. So, you know, if a student fit at CES, for example, we might be looking at $70,000 to $75,000 plus transportation. But let's say the student needed milestones, you're going to look at, you know, $160,000 to $170,000 plus transportation. So I would have to look individually at each of those 16 students if that program didn't exist and figure out what appropriate placements the PPT team would agree on outside of that.
But in all likelihood, with your experience, I think it would be more expensive to send them out of district, these 16.
Oh, it would be well more than 55, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. Yep, Mrs. Judy?
Can you hear me? Okay. Dr. Sunden, would it be possible to get some data on students who, I don't want to say may have or, probably, but I want to get a sense of students who could or want to take up something like an instrument, right? But could not, because maybe they can't afford the rental fee per month. I just want to get a sense of what that number looks like, and also maybe a sense of how much we're budgeting for those programs, what we're covering. So it's something you get offline, right? But just sort of thinking about.
So we have one of the best advocates for the performing arts in Brian Fraser.
Yes.
So I guarantee he'll be able to aggregate that information for us and see if we have opportunities to provide those experiences to our kids.
Okay. And just to give you a little bit of some background, last year when we were going through the budget process, I did bring up getting a better understanding of our process for allocating funds to things like sports or, the arts, et cetera, that are not necessarily mandatory, but we know they benefit our students greatly. And we understand that there are some programs where majority of it is fundraising. And we've seen a shift in our town where that's become more difficult, especially since the realignment, redistricting, whatever. I don't know the full impact of that and what opportunities, many of our kids could be missing out on. So I just wanted a better understanding of that and push to see if we could fund those things a little bit more.
One of the things we talk about is a sense of school connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, beyond academics and the relationships that kids have with our teachers, staff, and administrators, some of the things that really strengthen that connection to school are those extracurricular opportunities,
Exactly.
quote unquote, enrichment opportunities. So we'll be happy to dive into this. And we know that, particularly based on what we learned over the last 2 years of the pandemic, moving forward, student engagement is going to be even more critical if we're looking to move the needle on academic achievement. So we'll definitely engage in that research.
Good, thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I will adjourn tonight's meeting. Before I do, please save the date of this Thursday, February 24th, 2022. We will reconvene at 6:30 p.m. for more conversation, questions and answers with regard to the budget. And this meeting stands adjourned at 7:12 p.m.